Hi friends, welcome back to our Mentor Text Read Aloud time. I'm super glad you joined me again today. I miss you, and I find that when I read aloud to you guys, I feel a bit closer to you. So I'm really enjoying this time. I hope you guys are as well. This week, you've probably already figured out that we're going to be studying fairy tales. So we've done fables one week, we've looked at tall tales last week, and this week we're going to be looking at fairy tales. So today, I pulled out my treasury of fairy tales and other stories, and I'm going to share two of my favorite fairy tales with you. The first one is The Princess and the Pea. Sure, you guys are familiar with that. You're probably familiar with a lot of these fairy tales, but these are quick stories, and I'm going to share one or two with you right now. So the first one is The Princess and the Pea. As I'm reading this, it's hard for me to show you the pictures because it's a heavier, bigger book, so I'll show you the pictures when I get finished with the page. But I want you to be listening for some of the different characteristics of a fairy tale that I talked about in my earlier video that I shared with you. Think about the characters and the setting of a fairy tale, the problem, the solution. So just be thinking about those things as I'm sharing this with you. The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, there lived a handsome prince. He had loving parents, plenty of friends, and lived a wonderful life in the castle. But one thing made him sad. He did not have a wife. The prince had always wanted to marry a princess, but he wanted her to be clever and funny and loving and kind. None of the princesses that he met at parties and balls were quite right. Some of the princesses were too mean, and some were too rude. Some were too quiet, and some were too loud. And some were just plain boring. So the prince decided to travel the world in the hope of finding a perfect princess. He met many more princesses who tried to impress him with their beauty, their dancing, and their baking. But still none were quite right. "I'm not going to meet the right princess," he sighed to himself. "Oh, where is the girl of my dreams?" Months passed without success, so eventually the prince headed back to the castle. "Cheer up, my son," said the king. "You're still young. One day you will meet a wonderful girl, just like I met your mother." The king smiled at the queen, but he was at a loss to know how to make the prince happy again. Then one night, when even the king and queen had begun to give up hope of their son ever finding a bride, there was a terrible storm. The thunder roared, lightning flashed, and the rain poured down. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the wooden castle door. "I wonder who it could be out on such a stormy night," said the prince. When he opened the door, a pretty young girl stared back at him. She was soaked from head to toe. "Oh, please, your royal highness, may I come in for a moment?" she pleaded. "I was traveling to see some friends, but I got lost in the storm, and now I'm very cold and very wet." The prince ushered the poor girl in out of the wind and the rain. "You poor thing," said the queen. "You must stay the night. You cannot travel on in this weather." The prince smiled at the girl. "What is your name?" he asked her. "I'm Princess Penelope," she replied. "You are all very kind. I don't want to bother you." At the word princess, the queen smiled to herself. "I wonder," she thought, but she didn't say anything. She took the girl's hand and said aloud, "Of course not, my dear. Come in, and let's get you warm." Once the princess had changed into some dry clothes, the queen invited her to have some supper with the family. The prince listened contentedly as the charming princess chatted away over their meal. He could not stop gazing at her. She was clever and funny and loving and kind. By the end of the evening, the prince had fallen in love. The queen was delighted when she saw what was happening, but she wanted to be quite sure that Princess Penelope was a real princess. She went to the guest room in the castle and placed a tiny pea under the mattress. Then she told the servants to pile 20 more mattresses onto the bed. Then the queen had 20 feather quilts piled on top of the 20 mattresses. "Now we shall see if you are a real princess," murmured the queen to herself. The queen showed the princess to her room and tucked her into the towering bed. "Sleep well, my dear," she said. In the morning, the princess came down to breakfast, rubbing her eyes. "How'd you sleep, my dear?" the queen asked her. The princess didn't want to be rude, but she couldn't lie. "I'm afraid I hardly slept a wink," she replied, with a big yawn. "I'm so sorry, my dear," said the queen. "Was the bed not comfortable?" "There were so many lovely mattresses and quilts. It should have been very comfortable," replied the princess. "But I could feel something lumpy and bumpy, and now I am black and blue all over." The queen grinned and hugged the girl. "That proves it," cried the queen. "Only a real princess would be able to find a tiny pea through 20 mattresses and 20 feather quilts." The prince was filled with joy. He had finally met the princess of his dreams. Not long after that, the prince asked Princess Penelope to be his wife. She happily agreed, and they were married in the castle. The prince was never unhappy again. And as for the pea, it was put in the Royal Museum as proof that perfect princesses do exist. The end. I love that fairy tale. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to that as well. Our mentor sentence actually comes from this fairy tale. And let me tell you what that is. So this week the mentor sentence is, "Oh, please, Your Royal Highness, may I come in for a moment?" she pleaded. So that's the sentence you're going to find on your mentor sentence work for this week. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to share one more story with you, and it is Rumpelstiltskin. Won't take long, but I'd like to share this one with you as well. Once upon a time, there was a poor miller who had just one daughter. She was very beautiful, and he told many people about her. One day, the king rode through the village. The miller desperately wanted to impress the king. "Your Highness, my daughter is very pretty and smart," he said. But the king took no notice. "She can also spin straw into gold," the miller lied. "Your daughter must be very clever. Bring her to the palace tomorrow so I can see for myself," demanded the king. The miller didn't dare disobey the king, so the next day he brought his daughter to the palace. The king led the girl to a room filled with straw. On the floor stood a little stool and a spinning wheel. "Spin this straw into gold by tomorrow morning, or you will be thrown into the dungeon," said the king. Then he left the room and locked the door. The poor miller's daughter sat down on the stool and gazed at all the straw around her. She wept bitterly at the impossible task before her. All of a sudden, the door sprang open, and in came the strangest little man she had ever seen. "Why are you crying?" he asked. "I have to spin all this straw into gold before the morning, but I don't know how," replied the girl sadly. "If you give me your pretty necklace, I will spin the straw into gold," said the strange little man. "Oh, thank you," gasped the girl, wiping away her tears and handing over her necklace. The little man sat down in front of the spinning wheel and set to work. All night long the little man spun, and by morning the room was filled with reels of gold. And just as suddenly as he had appeared, the strange man disappeared. When the king arrived, he was astonished to see so much gold. "You have done very well," he said, "but I wonder if you can do the same thing again." He took the miller's daughter to a much bigger room. It, too, was filled with straw. "Spin this straw in gold by tomorrow morning, or you will be thrown into the dungeon," said the king, and once more he locked the girl in the room. The miller's daughter was very frightened. The strange little man appeared before her again. "Don't cry," he said. "Give me your shiny ring, and I will spin the straw into gold." She handed over her ring gratefully, and the little man set to work. Once again, all the straw was turned into gold. The king wanted to try one more time. "If you can do this again, you shall be queen," cried the king. The poor miller's daughter wept even more bitterly this time when the king left. "Why are you crying?" said the little man, appearing for the third time. "You know that I will help you." "But I have nothing left to give you," sobbed the little girl. "If you become queen," replied the little man, "you can give me your firstborn child." Oh my. The desperate miller's daughter agreed to the man's request, and once again he spun all the straw into gold. The king was so delighted when he saw all the gold the next day that he kept his promise and married the miller's daughter. The new queen was very happy and soon forgot about the promise she had made to the strange little man who saved her from the dungeon. A year later, the king and queen had a beautiful baby boy. Late one night, the little man appeared in the queen's bedroom as she watched over her sleeping baby. "I'm here for you, baby," he said, "just as you promised." The queen was horrified. "I'm here for your baby," he said, just as the queen promised. Sorry about that. The queen was horrified. Oh, please, take all my jewels and money instead," she begged, "but not my son." "No," replied the little man, "you made a promise, but I will give you 3 days. If in that time you can guess my name, then you will keep your baby." The desperate queen agreed. The next day, she sent messengers all over the kingdom to collect all the boys' names they could find. That night, the strange man appeared again, and the queen read out the names she had gathered. But after each name, he just laughed. The next day, the queen sent her messengers out to find even more names, and that night, she read out the new names when the little man appeared. But once again, the queen's guesses were wrong. On the third day, the poor queen was in despair. It was getting late by the time her last messenger returned. "Your Highness, I haven't found any new names," he said. "But as I was returning through the forest, I saw a little man leaping and dancing around a fire, singing a song. It went something like this: 'The queen will never win my game, for Rumpelstiltskin is my name.'" The queen was overjoyed. When the little man appeared that night, the queen said, "Are you perhaps named Rumpelstiltskin?" The little man was furious. He stamped his foot so hard it went through the floor. Then, pulling on his leg until he was free, he stomped out of the room, and he was never seen or heard from again. And the king and queen and their son lived happily ever after. The end. So I hope you enjoyed those 2 fairy tales. Remember, this week you're going to continue your study of fairy tales, and you'll be given an opportunity to choose some different fairy tales to read. I know that you're familiar with fairy tales, and I love that, and that's what makes this a fun study. But do spend some time reading some of those fairy tales as well, so you can become or re-familiarize yourself with them. I hope you enjoy your study. Remember, I'm here if you need anything. Feel free to email me, reach out to me so we can chat. And I hope you have a great week. Bye for now.